Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked Fly Fly Fishing, and welcome to my first video on tying easy Atlantic salmon flies. Now, if you've ever looked at videos on tying Atlantic salmon flies, you might be turned off by the complexity, the amount of materials, the exoticness of some of the materials, and some of the really tough techniques that are being used. I'm going to try and stay away from that as much as possible with this series of videos and go towards the flies that are straightforward, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 materials at most, and use pretty well standard techniques. And make it a series of Atlantic salmon flies that are things that can be done by the average fly tyer, and especially somebody who's just getting into Atlantic salmon flies. I think of it as being a good introduction. The other thing I'm going to do with this video is going to sort of head a little bit more towards being neat and away from being fast and strong. I'm in for getting my flies done fast. I like my flies to hang together. I don't like them to come apart on the first fish. And so I use techniques that, quick ties, hold together. Here I'm going to go a little bit more towards the neat. Not always. I'm going to take a few shortcuts. But, where possible, I'll try and throw in a little comment about neatness. Because Atlantic salmon flies, we are upping our game a little bit when we go into this genre of fly tying. So anyway, let's get started with the Alistair. It's a simple fly. It uses a minimal material, and it gives us an opportunity to practice some neatness. Okay, let's start off by talking about the hook. It's a size 4 and a salmon single. Atlantic salmon flies tend to be on the smaller side, so 4s and 6s will be typical. The thread is 8/0 black. Our tag and our rib is a small gold oval. Our body is a mylar gold silver in size 12, and we're going to be using the silver side. You could use a plain silver tinsel as well. And the wing and the throat is yellow bucktail. Now, when I read up on this pattern, they talked about dirty bucktail. I don't know, do I have to throw this in a mud puddle? Well, this is a dark yellow. This is the darkest I've got, so that'll have to make do for dirty yellow. So, let's get tying. Now, this is one of the ones where we have to be neat with the body because we're putting tinsel on top. So I'm going to take my time doing this body. Okay, we're going to stop at the hook point. Now we're going to bring in our oval ribbing and tag. Keep it underneath. Now if you want to we can pull this back a little bit. Now let's take our thread back, being careful to stay together with the wraps. Now bring it back. If you want, you can come in there and clip that off. Now I'm just going to advance my thread forward like that just to get it out of the way. Now put my first turn off of the thread and then bring it onto the thread with the next turn. And try not to show any black in between. This is a small oval tinsel, so it's easy to leave a lot of gaps in it, so take your time. Now we'll bring our thread back. Now here's one of the tricks that gets very handy. Change hands. Learn to wind with your left hand. Now I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to put a wrap in there and I'm going to hold it tight. There we go. Now we'll take a little bit of time to discuss this. This is going to create a little bit of a bump, but I'm not too terribly worried about that. It won't show up that badly. But you notice that I've been able to fold this back. Now I can reuse it as my rib. It saves me having to tie in another piece of material. Okay, next we're going to tie in our mylar. And I've got a little, you can see the slant I've put on that. Again, be very neat. The purpose of that slanted cut is to reduce the bulk. Now I'm going to work my thread forward in touching turns, again to keep that body as smooth as possible. Now you might have noticed I used half hitch tool to put in that half hitch instead of using my fingers. I often use my fingers, but I can be more precise with the half hitch tool. But I can get it going, that knot to go exactly where I want it to go. Okay, we're going to make our first wrap and try to avoid showing a lot of black here. Okay, that slipped. Okay, make the first wrap. Make sure we don't show any black. Now mylar will stretch, so we can actually put tension on it. And once I get off that bump, I am going to go in touching turns. Again, this is where I'm going to change hands. And I'm just going to wrap it underneath. There, now it's trapped, and it's not going to pull out on us, but the head is relatively smooth. I'm not going to have a great lump there. Now I'm going to tie this rib on without using the rotary vise, just so you see something different. Now I've got a bit of black showing there, so I'm going to make my first turn over that black. And then I'm going to start going forward. Again, change hands to lock it in place. And then trim it off underneath. And that tag end is underneath, or it's not going to cause a problem. One of the issues you can get into is if you end up with a big lump on top, it will cause problems when you put in the wing, and you'll get lumps forming when you try to build the head around it. So if you can make this relatively flat, and if you see a gap like I've got right there, take the moment to fill that gap up. Make that as smooth as possible. Now we're going to put in the throat and then the wing. So we've got to stack it, our yellow bucktail. Now I'm not using a large clump here. I'm keeping this fairly thin, and I got a couple of strays I'm going to pull out. You don't want a lot of bucktail on this fly. Now you want the throat to be out a little bit longer than the hook. Now you see what's happened. I'm glad this mistake happened. I can get a chance to show you something. I tied in, and it went behind where I tied my head. And what that'll do is that'll create sort of a head with this kind of shape to it. So what I've done is I've backed that off. Now I've made sure that when I wrapped the thread, I stayed on the actual head part of the fly, and I didn't go back behind it. So I'll just put a couple more wraps in front before I trim this off. Now what I can do here is I can take my bodkin, and I'll just put some bucktail on one side of the hook and some on the other. There we go. And I will clean that up a little bit. Okay, now for the next bit for the wing, we're going to stack it. Again, it's not a big clump. You've got a couple of strays, pull them out. Again, stay on the head. Don't allow it to slide behind the head. If your thread slides behind the head, that's when you're going to end up with these problems of producing a very ugly looking head. The back of the head, put in soft wraps to avoid spiking up that bucktail. Then come forward and we whip finish. Now, one of the things I'm going to do with this series is I'm going to point out little mistakes I make, so you can benefit from any little slip that I do and be aware of them in the future. And you can see right here, my black went a little bit too far back. I would have ideally stopped the black there. So that was when I was wrapping on the over the mylar. I went back a little bit too far. Anyway, there you go, the Alistair. It's a nice bright yellow fly. It'd be great for dingy days, and you know, it does work. So cheers, give it a try.